The Vexari Empire had conquered 437 worlds across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their warships darkened the skies of planets like swarms of metal locusts. Their soldiers, standing 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin like gray stone, had never known defeat. When the Empire turned its eyes toward the small blue planet called Earth, the High Council expected another easy victory. They had studied the dominant species. They had analyzed their technology. They had measured their strength and their speed and their numbers. Everything pointed to a simple conquest. Admiral Kethrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the planet grow larger in the viewscreen. His advisors had told him everything he needed to know. Humans were soft. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no armor. Their bodies were weak and slow compared to most species in the galaxy. They could not see in the dark like the Vexari could. They could not hear sounds beyond a narrow range. Their sense of smell was almost useless. "They will fall within 3 rotations," said Commander Vel, his second in command. "Our scans show they have primitive projectile weapons and some nuclear capability, but nothing that can stop our shields." Kethrak made a sound of agreement. "Begin the invasion at dawn on their largest continent. We will establish a base and then spread outward. Standard protocol." "Standard protocol," Vel repeated. He had used those words on 37 different worlds. It always worked the same way. Land, establish dominance, break the will of the native species, absorb them into the Empire. The first Vexari ships descended through Earth's atmosphere over a region the humans called Montana. It was chosen because the area had low population density. The Empire liked to establish themselves before moving on to major population centers. It was cleaner that way. Less resistance at first. Once the smaller populations submitted, the larger cities would see the futility of fighting back. The landing craft touched down in a wide valley surrounded by mountains. Snow covered the ground, and the air was cold enough to sting the lungs of the Vexari soldiers as they emerged. Their armor adjusted quickly, heating their bodies to comfortable levels. The soldiers formed ranks and began their march toward the nearest signs of habitation. Captain Morath led the first squad forward. His orders were simple: secure the area, find any humans, make them submit or eliminate them. He expected to find farmers or hunters, maybe some small families hiding in wooden shelters. What he found instead confused him deeply. There was a structure ahead, a house made of wood and stone. Smoke rose from a chimney, but standing between the Vexari and the house was a human, and next to the human was something else. An animal, 4 legs, fur the color of dark clouds, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the aliens with an intensity that made even Morath pause for a moment. "What is that creature?" asked one of his soldiers, a young warrior named Threll who had only been on 3 conquests before this one. Morath checked his scanner. Canis lupus familiaris, they call them dogs, domesticated predators. He made a dismissive gesture with 2 of his 4 arms. "Ignore it, focus on the human." The human was a female, older, with gray in her hair. She held a long weapon, a rifle of some kind, pointed directly at Morath's chest. Next to her stood not 1 dog but 3. They had appeared from the shadows like ghosts materializing from the darkness. All of them were large, with thick fur and powerful bodies. Their lips pulled back to show teeth that gleamed white in the morning light. "Put down your weapon," Morath commanded through his translator. "You are now subjects of the Vexari Empire. Resistance will result in death." The woman did not put down her rifle. Instead, she said something in her language that the translator rendered as, "Get off my land." Morath sighed. He had seen this before on other worlds. The stubborn ones who thought they could fight back. The ones who had not yet learned the futility of resistance. He raised his plasma rifle and aimed at the woman, preparing to make an example of her for any others who might be watching from the surrounding hills. He never got the chance to fire. The dogs moved faster than anything Morath had ever seen. Not faster than a Vexari could run, but faster than he expected from creatures of their size. One of them, the largest, leaped at the soldier to Morath's left. Its jaws closed around the gap between armor plates at the soldier's neck. The Vexari went down screaming, trying to pry the creature off, but its teeth had found flesh. The other two dogs attacked simultaneously. They did not go for the most armored parts of the Vexari soldiers. They went for joints, for gaps, for anywhere the armor was weak. It was as if they understood exactly where to bite, as if they had studied Vexari anatomy and identified every vulnerability. The woman fired her rifle. The bullet punched through Morath's arm, shattering the bone beneath. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Pain flooded his nervous system, more pain than he had felt in years of combat. Around him, his squad was in chaos. The dogs were everywhere, moving between the soldiers, striking and retreating, working together like a single organism with multiple bodies. Then more dogs appeared. They came from the tree line, from behind the house, from everywhere. Dozens of them. Some were as large as the first three. Others were smaller but no less fierce. They poured into the Vexari formation like water through a broken dam. Each one seemed to know exactly what to do. Each one moved with purpose and without fear. Morath managed to activate his emergency beacon before one of the dogs knocked him to the ground. He looked up into yellow eyes that held no fear, only purpose. The dog's teeth hovered near his throat, close enough that he could feel the hot breath on his skin. "Call them off," a voice shouted. It was the human woman walking toward him with her rifle still raised. "I can call them off or I can let them finish. Your choice." "What are you?" Morath gasped. The woman smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We are humans, and these are our partners. We have been together for 40,000 years. Did your empire not know that?" Morath's scanner had told him the dogs were domesticated. That word, domesticated, had made him think of the tame creatures kept as food on other worlds. Docile things that followed their masters around and did simple tricks. He had not understood what the word meant to humans. He had not understood that domestication could create warriors instead of servants. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kethrak received the emergency signal from the surface. He listened to the confused reports. One squad destroyed, another pinned down, a third in full retreat, all because of animals. "This is impossible," he said. "Send more troops, overwhelming force." He did not yet understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The Vexari had studied human weapons and human technology. They had measured human strength and human speed, but they had not thought to study what humans kept beside them. They had not realized that humans were not alone. They had not understood that every human came with allies built into their very way of life. In the house in Montana, the old woman named Sarah put down her rifle and knelt beside her dogs. She ran her hands through their fur and whispered words of praise. They had fought for her without hesitation. They always did. It was what they had been doing for her entire life. It was what dogs had been doing for humans since before history began. "Good boys," she said. "Good girls, such good dogs." Outside, more Vexari ships descended from the sky. The invasion was just beginning. But so was the resistance, and the humans had allies the Empire had never expected. Across the world, the same scene played out in different ways. In cities and villages, in forests and deserts, humans and their dogs stood together against the invaders. The Vexari had thought they were conquering a single species. They were wrong. They had declared war on a partnership older than civilization itself. The news of the first day's failures spread through the Vexari command structure like a disease. Admiral Kethrak read report after report, each one more disturbing than the last. In a city called Detroit, a group of humans with dogs had ambushed a Vexari patrol in an abandoned building. The dogs had moved through the darkness, guiding the humans, warning them of danger, attacking from shadows. 12 Vexari soldiers dead. 0 human casualties. In the countryside of a nation called Germany, Farmers had released their dogs to defend their lands. The Vexari had been forced to retreat from what their maps showed as a minor agricultural zone. The dogs had worked in packs, organized and disciplined, herding the alien soldiers into kill zones where the humans waited with weapons. In the frozen north, in places called Alaska and Siberia, humans rode on sleds pulled by dogs through terrain the Vexari vehicles could not cross. They struck at supply lines and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The soldiers tried to follow, but the dogs knew the land. They knew where the ice was thin. They knew where the snow would give way. They led the Vexari into traps again and again. Kethrak summoned his intelligence officers. "Explain this to me," he demanded. "How do we not know about these creatures?" The chief intelligence officer, a thin Vexari named Sil, pulled up data on his screen. His hands were shaking slightly. He had never seen the Admiral so angry. "We knew about them, Admiral. They are listed in our files as domesticated animals, companions. Our analysis suggested they would be a non-factor in any conflict." "Non-factor," Kethrak's voice rose to a roar. "They have killed more of my soldiers in one day than I expected to lose in the entire conquest." Sil shifted nervously. "We misunderstood the nature of the relationship, Admiral. We assumed domestication meant the humans had made the creatures subservient, weak, that they kept them as we keep livestock. But the data we are now receiving suggests something very different." He pulled up images. Dogs walking beside humans. Dogs sleeping in human beds. Dogs playing with human children. Dogs working alongside humans in fields, in forests, in cities. Dogs wearing harnesses and performing tasks. Dogs in uniforms serving with human military units. "The humans did not domesticate these creatures to make them weak," Sil continued. "They domesticated them to make them partners. The dogs retained their predatory instincts, their pack behavior, their aggression, but they redirected all of it toward protecting humans. The humans became their pack, their family." Kethrak stared at the images. "How long has this partnership existed?" 40,000 of their years, Admiral, perhaps longer. There is evidence that humans and wolves began working together during their ice age, when both species struggled to survive. Instead of competing, they cooperated. The wolves helped humans hunt prey larger than either could take alone. The humans shared food and shelter with the wolves. Over time, the wolves became dogs and the partnership became unbreakable. Unbreakable. Sil nodded slowly. The bond appears to be deeply ingrained in both species. Humans do not just train dogs, Admiral. They love them, and the dogs love the humans in return. They will die to protect their humans without hesitation. We have recorded multiple instances of dogs throwing themselves between our weapons and their human companions. They do not seem to understand fear when their family is threatened. Admiral Kethrak sat back in his chair. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had faced species with claws that could tear through armor, species with venom that could melt flesh, species with hive minds that coordinated millions of bodies. But he had never faced anything like this. He had never faced love weaponized. "We cannot fight a species that has a loyal army already built into their social structure," he said slowly. "How many of these dogs exist on the planet?" Sil checked his data. Current estimates suggest approximately 500 million domesticated dogs on Earth. There are also populations of their wild ancestors, wolves, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and other canine species they may be able to work with. 500 million. Kethrak closed his eyes. "We brought 200,000 soldiers for this invasion." "Yes, Admiral, we are outnumbered." The silence on the bridge was heavy. Outside, through the viewscreen, the blue planet turned slowly. It looked so peaceful from up here, so harmless. But now Kethrak knew what lurked on its surface. An army of teeth and loyalty. An army that could not be bought or threatened or negotiated with. An army that would fight to the death for creatures not even of their own species. Down on the surface, the fighting continued. Vexari soldiers learned to fear the sound of barking in the darkness. They learned that dogs could smell them coming from miles away. They learned that the creatures could track them through any terrain, in any weather, across any distance. No matter where they hid, no matter how carefully they covered their tracks, the dogs would find them. And they learned something else. The dogs were not the only animals the humans had partnered with. In the grasslands of Africa, Vexari scouts encountered humans riding on the backs of horses, moving at speeds no soldier on foot could match. The riders struck with spears and rifles, then vanished before the Vexari could respond. The horses and riders moved as one being, anticipating each other's movements, covering ground with impossible speed. In the mountains of South America, humans used llamas and alpacas to carry supplies through high passes where vehicles could not go. They built supply lines that the Empire could not cut. Every time the Vexari thought they had isolated a human settlement, new supplies appeared from routes that should have been impassable. In the fields of Asia, humans used water buffalo to plow through terrain that bogged down Vexari transports. They planted traps and ambushes in places the Empire's map said were impossible to defend. The animals seemed to understand what was happening. They seemed to cooperate willingly with the humans who rode them. But everywhere always there were dogs. A young Vexari soldier named Threll wrote in his personal log, "They say humans are weak. They say humans have no natural weapons, but humans do not need natural weapons. They have turned the entire animal kingdom of their planet into allies. What chance do we have against a species that can make friends with anything?" Threll would not survive the week. He was killed in a night raid. The humans had used dogs to find his unit's camp in the darkness. They had used trained birds to scout the positions of the guards, and they had used their own cunning to plan an attack that left no survivors. When the rescue team found the camp, they found Threll's log still active. They read his final entry. "I understand now why they did not run away from the wolves. They saw something in those predators that they recognized. A fellow survivor, a potential partner, and they reached out. What kind of species looks at a creature that could kill them and sees a friend instead of an enemy? What kind of species is brave enough to try?" Admiral Kethrak read that entry himself. He read it 3 times, and for the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if this war could be won. For the first time, he began to consider the possibility that the Vexari had finally met a species they could not conquer. The Vexari High Council met in emergency session aboard the command station orbiting Earth's moon. Admiral Kethrak stood before the holographic images of the 5 council members, each one representing billions of Vexari citizens across hundreds of worlds. He had stood in this position before, reporting victories and conquests. Today he stood here to report something different, something the Empire had never experienced before. "Explain yourself," demanded Councillor Vreth, the eldest of the 5. His voice echoed through the chamber with centuries of authority behind it. "You were given the finest fleet in the Empire. You faced a species with no significant space capability, yet your reports speak of failure after failure. How is this possible?" Kethrak straightened his posture. He had rehearsed this speech 100 times. He knew every word would be analyzed, every admission of weakness would be used against him. But he had to speak the truth. The alternative was to continue a war they could not win. "Honored Council, we underestimated the enemy, not the humans themselves but their allies." "Allies?" Councillor Yin laughed. "Our intelligence showed no allied species on that world. The humans are alone in their star system. They have not made contact with any other spacefaring civilization. They are not alone on their planet." Kethrak activated a display. Images filled the chamber, dogs in armor trained for war, horses carrying soldiers across battlefields, hawks with cameras strapped to their bodies scouting enemy positions, dolphins swimming alongside human naval vessels detecting mines and submarines. The humans have spent their entire history forming partnerships with the other species of their world, Kethrak explained. They call it domestication, but it is not what we thought. They did not make slaves of these creatures. They made family. Family? Counselor Vreth's voice dripped with contempt. You are telling me that we are losing a war because of family. Yes, Counselor. The humans share a bond with their animals that we have never seen in any other species. When we attack a human, we are not attacking one being. We are attacking an entire web of relationships, and every member of that web fights back. He showed more images. A human child crying over a dead dog. A human soldier refusing to leave a wounded horse behind. A human family gathering around an old cat as it died, treating the animal's passing with the same grief they would show for one of their own kind. They love these creatures, Kethrak said, and the creatures love them back. It creates a bond that cannot be broken by fear or pain or threat of death. The dogs do not flee from our weapons. They charge toward them because they are protecting their family. The council was silent for a long moment. Even Counselor Vreth seemed uncertain what to say. Finally, Counselor Emran spoke. She was the youngest of the five, known for her sharp mind and her willingness to consider new ideas. You are suggesting we cannot win this war through conventional means. I am suggesting that conventional means will result in losses the Empire cannot afford. For every human we kill, we must also kill their animals. For every dog we kill, we create a human who will never surrender. The mathematics of conquest do not work here. The more we fight, the more we lose. The more we lose, the more they resist. Then what do you propose? Kethrak had thought about this question for many sleepless cycles. He had considered every option, every strategy, and he had come to only one conclusion. I propose we negotiate. The word fell like a bomb. The Vexari Empire did not negotiate. It conquered. It absorbed. It ruled. In 437 worlds, they had never once sat down with an enemy as equals. They had never admitted that another species could stand against them. Impossible, Counselor Vreth declared. We would become a laughingstock. Other species would think us weak. Other conquered worlds would rise up against us. Other species already think us foolish for losing so many soldiers to pets, Kethrak replied. His voice was calm but firm. Better to be seen as wise enough to recognize a formidable enemy than stubborn enough to continue a war we cannot win. The council debated for hours. Kethrak stood and listened as they argued about honor and reputation and the future of the Empire. But he could see the numbers in their eyes. They knew the truth. This invasion was bleeding them dry. Every day brought new casualties. Every week brought new defeats. On the surface of Earth, humans were adapting faster than anyone had expected. They had turned their dogs into war machines. They had trained them to wear protective gear, to carry supplies, to deliver messages through areas too dangerous for humans to cross. The dogs worked in teams, communicating through barks and body language that no Vexari translator could decode. But it was not just the dogs that made the difference. In the waters around the coastal cities, dolphins had become the guardians of the harbors. They detected Vexari submarines with their natural sonar, warning the human defenders before any attack could be launched. The Empire had lost a dozen underwater vessels to traps the dolphins had led them into. The creatures seemed to understand the stakes. They seemed to know they were fighting for their home. In the skies, falcons and eagles worked alongside human aircraft. They could spot things from above that sensor's mist. They could dive through gaps in defenses too small for any machine. They had become the eyes of the resistance, circling high above battlefields and reporting back to their human partners. And everywhere, in every home and every shelter, there were the smaller creatures. Cats that warned of intruders with a hiss. Parrots that repeated overheard conversations, passing intelligence from one human group to another. Even rats and pigeons, trained to carry messages through the ruins of bombed cities. A Vexari intelligence report noted, "The humans have created a planet-wide network of animal allies. Destroying this network would require the extinction of hundreds of species. Such an action would render the planet worthless for colonization and would drain resources the Empire cannot spare. Recommend reassessment of conquest objectives." Kethrak used that report in his final argument to the Council. "We came to Earth seeking resources and a new colony world. If we continue this war, we will have neither. The resources will be spent fighting, and the planet will be devastated beyond use. Our only path to any victory is diplomacy." Councillor Vreth scowled. "And what would we say to these humans? What could we possibly offer them?" "Peace," Kethrak said simply. "We offer them peace in exchange for trade and cooperation. We tell them we recognize their strength. We tell them we wish to be their partners, not their masters." "Partners?" Councillor Imran tasted the word, like they partnered with their animals. "Perhaps. The humans seem to have a talent for finding common ground with very different species. Perhaps they can find it with us as well." The vote was close, 3-2 in favor of negotiation. Councillor Vreth voted against, as did one other, but it was enough. Kethrak sent a message to Earth, a request for talks, a white flag, though the humans called it a ceasefire. The response came from a human named General Sarah Chen. Yes, that's Sarah, the old woman from Montana with the rifle and the dogs. She had become one of the leaders of the resistance, her story spreading across the planet as an example of what ordinary humans could do when they stood with their animals. Her message was simple: "We will talk, but understand this. We do not abandon those who fight beside us. Any peace must include all of Earth's species, not just humans." Kethrak read the message 3 times. He thought about what it meant. The humans were negotiating not just for themselves, but for their animals. They were including the dogs and the horses and the dolphins and the cats in any agreement. He had never heard of such a thing. No species in the galaxy included animals in their treaties. It was absurd. It was unprecedented. It was exactly what he should have expected from humans. The peace negotiations took place on neutral ground, a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Vexari built a temporary structure there, a dome of metal and glass that could hold representatives from both sides. Admiral Kethrak arrived with a small honor guard, unarmed as a gesture of good faith. He had never felt so vulnerable. Without his weapons and armor, he was just a tired old soldier who had finally met an enemy he could not defeat. General Sarah Chen arrived with her delegation, and her dogs. 3 of them, the same 3 that had fought beside her on that first day in Montana. They had become famous across Earth and beyond. Their names were Max, Luna, and Bear. They walked into the negotiation chamber like they owned it, their eyes scanning every corner, their noses testing the air. They were looking for threats. They would not stop looking until their human was safe. Kethrak watched them carefully. He had learned to respect these creatures. He had lost too many soldiers to their teeth and their courage. "They come with you everywhere?" he asked. Sarah smiled. It was a warmer smile than the one she had shown him months ago when he had been lying on the ground with a dog's jaws near his throat. Time and circumstances had changed things between them. "They are my family. Where I go, they go. I have read reports about them. Max led the attack on our supply depot in Colorado. Luna tracked our scouts through 300 miles of wilderness. Bear held off an entire squad while civilians escaped." He paused. "They are remarkable creatures." "They are dogs," Sarah said simply. "This is what dogs do. This is what they have always done." They sat at a long table, humans on one side, Vexari on the other. The dogs settled at Sarah's feet, but their eyes never stopped moving. Even now, in a place of peace, they watched for danger. They were ready to protect their human at a moment's notice. The negotiations were difficult. The Vexari wanted to save face. They could not admit total defeat, even though that was the reality. The humans wanted guarantees. They wanted to ensure the Empire would never return with another fleet. They wanted their home to be safe. But slowly, over days of talking, they found common ground. The Vexari would withdraw from Earth. They would recognize human sovereignty over their solar system. In exchange, the humans would open trade relations with the Empire, technology, culture, ideas, not as subjects but as partners. Partners, Kethrak said, signing the final document. That word keeps coming up. Sarah signed her own copy. It is the foundation of everything we are. We do not survive alone, we never have. When we faced the Ice Age, we partnered with wolves. When we built civilizations, we partnered with horses and cattle and sheep. When we explored the oceans, we partnered with dogs and dolphins. It is how we think, how we live. And now you wish to partner with us. If you are willing to meet us as equals, yes. Kethrak looked down at the dogs. Max was watching him with golden eyes that held neither fear nor hatred, just attention, just readiness. There was something almost familiar in that gaze, something that reminded Kethrak of the young soldiers under his command. On my world, Kethrak said slowly, there were once creatures similar to your dogs, predators that lived in packs. We drove them to extinction long ago. We saw them as competition, as threats. I am sorry to hear that. I wonder now what might have happened if we had chosen differently, if we had seen them as potential partners instead of enemies. He shook his head. But we cannot change the past. We can only learn from it. That is all any of us can do. The treaty was signed. The Vexari withdrew. Their ships lifted off from Earth's surface and returned to the fleet. Within a month they had left the solar system entirely. The invasion was over. Earth was free. But the story did not end there. In the years that followed, humans and Vexari began the slow process of building trust. Trade ships traveled between Earth and the Empire, carrying goods and ideas. Human ambassadors lived on Vexari worlds, always accompanied by their dogs. The sight of a human and their animal companion became common throughout the galaxy. Children on distant planets grew up seeing pictures of dogs and asking their parents what those creatures were. And slowly, something changed in the Empire. It started small. A Vexari scientist who studied the human-dog bond and wondered if something similar could be created with other species. A Vexari child who saw images of human children playing with puppies and asked their parents why they did not have such companions. A Vexari soldier who remembered the courage of the dogs on Earth and felt something that might have been admiration. Kethrak retired from the military and became an ambassador. He spent his final years studying human culture, trying to understand the species that had defeated his invasion without destroying his people. He visited Earth many times. He met with Sarah again and again. He even learned to pet her dogs, though it took him years to overcome his fear of their teeth. He wrote a book about his experiences. The title translated roughly as The Partners, What Humans Taught Us About Strength. In it, he argued that the Vexari had always misunderstood what made a species powerful. We thought power came from conquest, he wrote, from dominance, from proving ourselves superior to all others, but humans showed us a different kind of power, the power of connection, of loyalty, of love that crosses the boundaries between species. A human with a dog is not just a human plus a dog. They are something greater than either alone. They are partners. They are family. They are stronger together than they could ever be apart. The book was controversial. Many Vexari rejected its message. They called it weakness. They called it surrender. But many others read it and wondered. They looked at their own lives, at their own loneliness, and they asked themselves if there might be another way. On Earth, Sarah lived long enough to see the first Vexari tourists arrive. They came to see the dogs, of course. They wanted to understand these creatures that had fought so bravely against their warriors. They wanted to know the secret of the bond. Sarah met them at her farm in Montana, the same farm where the invasion had begun. She was very old now, her hair completely white, her body bent with age, but Max was still with her. He was old too, gray in his muzzle, slow in his movements. But his eyes were still sharp and his devotion to Sarah had not dimmed. He still slept at the foot of her bed. He still followed her everywhere. He still watched for danger, even though the war was long over. The Vexari tourists gathered around, keeping a respectful distance. They were afraid of the dog, even though Max showed no aggression toward them. They remembered too well what dogs could do. "How do you make them love you?" one of them asked. "What is the secret?" Sarah knelt beside Max, her hand resting on his head. The old dog leaned into her touch, his tail wagging slowly. It was a simple question, but it contained the essence of everything the Vexari did not understand. "There is no secret," she said. "You just love them back. You treat them with respect. You listen to what they need. You protect them when they are scared. You comfort them when they are hurt. You stay with them until the end. That is all. That is everything." Max died that winter peacefully with Sarah beside him. She buried him on the hillside behind her house, next to Luna and Bear, who had passed in the years before. On his grave marker she wrote, "He was my partner. He saved my life. He changed the galaxy." It was not an exaggeration. The Vexari told stories about the dogs of Earth for generations. They became legends, symbols of a kind of strength the Empire had never understood. And slowly, on world after world, the Vexari began to seek out their own partners. They found them, not creatures exactly like dogs, but other species that could form bonds, that could share loyalty, that could become more than servants or slaves. The first Vexari animal partnerships were awkward, uncertain. The Vexari had forgotten how to connect with other beings. They had to learn it all over again. But they learned, slowly, painfully, with many failures along the way. They learned to be patient. They learned to be gentle. They learned to see other creatures as individuals with their own needs and desires. They learned what humans had learned 40,000 years ago beside the campfires of the Ice Age. 1,000 years after the invasion, the galaxy had transformed. The Vexari Empire was gone, replaced by a federation of species that worked together as partners. And at the heart of that federation was a simple truth that humans had discovered in the snow beside hungry wolves. You do not have to face the darkness alone. The history books recorded the invasion of Earth as a military conflict, but those who understood knew it was something more. It was the moment when the galaxy learned what humans had always known, that the greatest strength is not the ability to conquer. It is the ability to connect. It is the willingness to reach across the divide between species and say, "I see you. I trust you. Will you walk with me?" And it all began because, long ago, a human looked at a wolf and saw not an enemy but a friend. Sarah's great-great-grandchildren still lived on the farm in Montana. They raised dogs there, the descendants of Max and Luna and Bear. And every year, on the anniversary of the first day of the invasion, visitors came from across the galaxy to pay their respects. They came to see the dogs. They came to learn. And they came to remember the lesson that Earth had taught the stars. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not run away from the things that scare you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is reach out your hand and say, "Would you like to be my friend?" The wolves had said yes, and nothing in the galaxy had ever been the same. Sarah passed away in her sleep on a quiet spring night, surrounded by the great-grandpups of her first companions. She was 102 years old. At her funeral, representatives from 12 different species attended. They came from across the galaxy, united by a truth she had helped teach them. Her final message, written in her own hand and read aloud at the service, was simple. To whoever hears this, remember that strength does not mean standing alone. The strongest thing I ever did was kneel down beside a scared puppy and promise to take care of him. He spent his whole life keeping that promise in return. Find your partners. Love them well, and never forget that the universe is less lonely when you have someone walking beside you. Above the farm, Vexari ships hovered silently, paying tribute. Their crews stood at attention, honoring the woman who had helped end a war and begin a new age. And beside each crew member stood their own companions, creatures from a dozen different worlds, all looking down at Earth with something like wonder. The humans had not just defended their planet. They had shown the galaxy a different way to be strong, not through conquest or domination, but through partnership and love. And it had all started with wolves in the snow, 40,000 years ago, when a human decided not to run away.